this Matchless Spitfire 15 came in. The owner says he was using it on a gig. It blew a fuse. He changed the fuse, and now he has no sound. Let's see what's going on. Step one, let's make sure that the correct fuse is in there. It's supposed to be a 2 amp fuse. It is a 2 amp fuse. Let me measure with my meter that it actually is good. Sometimes they visibly look okay, but there's no connection. All right, this fuse is good. So we are going inside. Let me take all this stuff out, and I see the problem actually. Let me show you the problem. This may be a very simple fix. Go ahead and put this fuse back, and I will show you the problem. Some of you might have already spotted it. Right back here, this preamp tube has lost vacuum. I bet it's broken. With a nice healthy crack there. So normally I would just put a new tube in there, make sure it works, and send it out the door. If that's all that the amp ends up needing, that's all I will bill for. But we're going to go a little bit past that for 2 reasons. Number one, he's a good client, great musician. I want to make sure that everything in this amp is bulletproof. It's good every couple of years for amps to have a going through and a clean bill of health. And 2, I know a lot of people would like to see how a Matchless Spitfire 15 is built. So let me take it all apart and we'll do all that fun stuff. First, let me report something very good. They're using machine screw inserts in the cleats for all the panels so that it's not a wood screw that'll get torn up. Let me show you a bad thing that I don't think is factory. It may be a little hard to see here, but those solder joints on the speaker terminals are really, really bad. I'm going to redo those. You know, I've had some differences with Matchless design decisions over the years, but I have never seen any work like that from Matchless. I assume someone swapped speakers at some point or replaced this wire. I think this wire's, yeah. Either they replaced the wire or they swapped speakers and someone did this. That's not Matchless, and it's not going to be how the amp goes home. So I'm glad I didn't just swap a tube, because that's crap. I pointed this out recently on a Friedman, but the better amps out there tend to have a washer beneath the dress washer. So the dress washer, which has fairly sharp little edges, doesn't just cut the Tolex. So it's all those little touches, all these little details, they add up. Everything inside looks to be in really good shape. Everything's original, including all the paint on all the connectors and the multiple wire wraps, so that when service is eventually needed, it gets much more expensive than it otherwise would need to be. The bias in this amp is insanely hot, as is par for the course with Matchless, with 123 volts coming out of the wall right now, which is typical for Memphis. It's at 16.81 watts idle. That's on a 12-watt tube. Vox never really exceeded 14 watts, and I don't think it should exceed 14 watts. You're going to have very short output tube life and generate a lot of heat. On that last Matchless I had in, which was a DC-30, the heat from the tubes got so much that the plastic panel on the back warped and broke and looked ugly. It was just getting cooked. I'll talk to the owner about cooling off the bias. That's really just a matter of changing this resistor for a larger one, making sure that the plate voltage doesn't exceed spec, which is a little bit tricky on this. They're already at 342.5 volts DC plate to cathode, which is right at the bleeding edge of what an EL84 wants to have. Comparable AC15 from 62, once you have the correct wall voltage, it's about 300 volts. 3 to 310 typically. AC30s tend to be about 320 to 330. This is approaching the datasheet max, I think 350. Let's see what it sounds like though, and then I'll call the owner and let him know that at the very least he needs one preamp tube and for me to rewire the speaker, and we'll see if everything else is working all right. All right, that PEC pot there, it's a little bit scratchy. It may not be the pot, maybe a tube, but no, if it was a tube, it'd be scratchy throughout its entire range. These PEC pots promise text that if you use them, you won't ever have scratchiness because they're sealed. Sadly, they actually do develop scratchiness, and then they're really hard to clean. But this one worked itself out just from me turning it for a few times, so that's good. Not a very bright amp. That's with the tone all the way up. That's really dark for a Matchless. A little bit of scratchiness on the master volume too. Let's see if I can work that out. I'm wondering if one of the preamp tubes is weak. Let me swap the two preamp tubes real quick. And if that doesn't get us there, let me swap the EL84s. I just want to make sure that all the tubes are healthy. This thing should be louder and less muted sounding. Well, two things. First of all, yeah, the old JAN 12AX7 that was in V1 had a much lower output and very dark in comparison. This is a current production tube. And that's a lot better, but the amp still doesn't sound like a Matchless. And on closer inspection, this bright cap had been cut. It's not in place. I think this would sound better with the bright cap. I don't know whether the owner cut it or whether it came to him that way. I don't know the history of this amp, given that speaker connection. I'm going to temporarily reconnect that cap and see what the response to the tone pod is. I know that the owner plays a lot of jazz. I think as designed with that bright cap, the amp will have a more balanced sound, and then you can sculpt that with the tone control. Let me reconnect that just as a test. I had the tone control all the way up on the previous stuff, so let me turn it down to where that hiss from the bright cap just starts to come in. Yeah, this amp is transformed by that cap as designed. It sounds balanced. You can still roll it all off for that jazzy thing. If you want to sound like Joe Pass, yeah, I think that this amp needs to have that bright cap reconnected. And sadly, the original cap was cut. The lead was cut short, and it's all siliconed in place. Now it's just the Mallory 150M. I can probably just remove that silicone, move the cap, apply some fresh silicone, and only the guys at Matchless and I would know that anything was ever done there. But the amp is just so much more vibrant and alive as designed in that aspect. I think it would sound even better if the output bias was cooled, so the tubes would be swinging through more of their ideal range when pushed. Not that this is pushing them a lot. I would like to change the bias. I would like to reconnect the bright cap. Those are optional. It is crucial that this amp gets two new 12AX7 preamp tubes. And I'm going to redo those speaker connections right now, and then call the owner with what I found, and we'll see where we go from there. Anyone else remember Goofus and Gallant from the old Highlights magazine for kids? Well, this is Goofus. I don't know if that's just not getting them hot enough or using acid core. I mean, it was really a mess. I got the terminals all cleaned up with the old solder and nasty burnt flux off. I'm gonna redo these properly. Well, that's not my best work, but it's solid. The wire, and I don't know if it's Matchless wire. I think it is because of the staples in the cabinet. The stranded bits don't want to take solder, and the insulation has a relatively low melt point, so it's a tricky thing. But I got two good solder joints and only slight deformation of the insulation right at the solder. That'll be fine. It's rock solid. No one's gonna see it. I know that mechanically and electronically, it's great. Just not my prettiest work. On that note, I wanted to check the wiring inside here. That's all factory. You can tell by that lovely purple blue. So that means those factory, the wires are factory. Let me put this jack back. Did you see that? Yeah. Put all this jack back together, make a cup of coffee, and call the owner. All right, I spoke to the owner. I've done a bunch of amps for him already. I have his trust, which is nice. I reconnected the bright cap, and I'm about to show you that. I increased the screen grid resistors from 100 ohm half watts to 470 ohm 3 watts. Make current production tubes have an easier life of it. And I have a 200 ohm 10 watt cathode resistor temp 10. The original was 120. With the 120, the bias was at 16.81 idle. With the 200, the bias is at 12.06 idle. So I need to split the difference. We're going to be closer to 150, 160 something ohms when I'll order the correct final part. You don't have a lot of gradations. You know, they come in standard sizes, so standard values. So I want to get something that sits us between 13 and 14 watts. And I know now 200 is as high as I'd want to go. 120 is as low as I'd want to go. I will find the Goldilocks solution for this amp. Here's what it sounded like at this point. So with the tone at noon, we'll get the volume up a little bit. So the volume's at noon, turn the master all the way up, tone's at noon. Turn the tone down. Turn the tone up. Gets a little too bright. I'm not nuts about the taper of the tone pot. A lot of the useful change happens from noon to 7 o'clock. So I think probably here about 9:30, 10 o'clock is where the owner probably will like it most of the time. Where it's not really bright, but the blanket is gone from the amp. What you just heard, I reconnected the stock speaker, which I believe is just a greenback, though it's Matchless branded. I needed to confirm the speaker was good and that I had not made any mistake in my speaker wiring, though I did not anticipate that I had. You can see here is the genuine cured Matchless silicone. Here's the genuine uncured sonic audio silicone. It will set up and be indistinguishable once it is fully cured. The amp is sounding great now overall. So 2 new 12AX7s. We're going to get the magic value in a 10 watt Vishay Dale resistor. On that cathode bias resistor, I'll put the clear plastic sleeving on like the others. I didn't do it on the screen grid resistors. I'm capable of it. It would just add extra work for nothing. There's nothing to insulate them from. They're not close to anything else. They're not going to touch anything else. And the things which are closest to them already have the stock clear plastic insulation. In certain places in an amp, that's a good thing. Matchless takes it to extremes. They are, in fact, matchless in that quality, but it's a bit overkill and a little bit of a hype. Not everything needs to have insulation.